So, it is certainly apparent to the court that Mr. Martin presents a serious danger to the safety of the community, and therefore he should be punished to the fullest extent of the law.
All right, welcome back to the Law and Crime Report. My name is Bob Bianchi. Happy Monday to you, and for all of you who are, like I am, in New Jersey, snowed in. I hope you're having a great day and a safe day as well. Anyway, Willie Martin, that was a judge talking in court about this 27-year-old who was a minor league baseball player. He was on his way to potentially the majors, but his career was derailed. He had mental health issues. He was on a 72-hour mental health hold when he went back to his parents, blaming his parents for the mental health hold, as well as a number of other factors, and wound up bludgeoning his father, his uncle, and an ADT alarm man with a baseball bat. He was convicted at trial, and he received a life without parole. Here's the judge talking about the potential and prospects of this young man prior to the downfall.
This case was certainly a troubling one in many aspects. The defendant in this case was, and by all accounts, a talented baseball player. I think I heard testimony that he was one of the top prospects in the state of California. He was going to be the next Derek Jeter. He was drafted at an early age, signed a very large monetary contract to play in the Tampa Bay Devil Rays organization. And unfortunately, Mr. Martin didn't take advantage of that talent. Instead, he squandered it by using drugs, partying with his friends, and it ultimately caused, of course, both the team and his family to disassociate themselves with him as best they could. And of course, we know the tragic consequences that occurred in this case, which included him physically and verbally assaulting his parents and his family. And then when he was diagnosed with his mood disorder, he was provided medication to treat that illness and apparently chose to stop taking that medication and self-medicate with illegal substances. His talent and his contract and all of the opportunities, and maybe most important, the closeness and love of his family were squandered.
Well, something else could potentially be the next Derek Jeter, but now we'll spend the rest of his life in prison. I got two great guests to discuss this with. Tiffany Simmons out of Atlanta, Georgia, is an attorney, actress, and producer who is a frequent legal analyst on many networks, including ours, Court TV, CNN, HLN, After Dark. She handles criminal defense, civil rights cases, and business cases, to mention a few. And the great Gene Rossi, 30 years at the DOJ, has a room, I never will stop saying this, the Gene Rossi War Room at the Department of Justice. I am so jealous. 110 trials, trained over 1,000 DOJ prosecutors, and is a law and crime analyst. Tiffany, I want to throw to you first with this. I mean, once again, we see somebody with a promising career, mental health issues, and potentially addiction issues, as we're listening to, and they don't stay on their meds that are helping them out, but rather go off them and then wind up taking illegal substances, causing tragic consequences. What are your thoughts about this sad case?
This case, it was very, very sad. I looked at both sides of it. Of course, you have a family that is forever changed because you have people that are now deceased by the hands of their loved one. And then on the other side, you have someone that is known to have mental illness that was in the process of a 72-hour mental health hold. And unfortunately, his mental health and that illness just overtook, his body and overtook, I believe, his mind. A lot of times we don't pay attention to mental illness in minorities. And in this instance, he was in a position where he could have possibly got help prior to this. He was a great baseball player. He had a promising MLB career coming up. So it is very unfortunate to see that this turn of events and how his life is forever changed.
Yeah, Gene, I used to say when I was prosecutor that I felt like our jails were becoming more mental health institutions than they were correctional facilities, because the old mantra, at least back in the day when I was doing it for the 6 years that I ran the county, was do more with less, do more with less, cutting health services, cutting, outreach. And I'm not saying that would have made a difference, but there's no doubt. But it's sad to me as a commentary that the jail was providing better mental health services than the outside community was able to do. So what do you think? But and also, Gene, while you're talking about this, please tell our audience the difference between insanity, because a lot of people may say, well, why was he found not guilty by reason of insanity? That is a far different legal burden for defense attorneys to overcome than just somebody with mental health issues.
Well, insanity basically is when you committed the crime, you didn't know the difference between right and wrong, and you didn't understand your actions. Mental disease or defect is something that can be a diminished capacity argument. But I got to tell you, there's a lot of overlap. It's a thin line between a mental disease and defect and insanity. They sometimes are very close. What bothers me about this, and Tiffany addressed it, what happened before this incident where he took the lives of 3 people, his father, his uncle, and Mr. Swanson? The system failed him. The mental health system in this state failed him. And I got to say this, I think the parents failed him, because they should have gotten him help much sooner. A Monday morning quarterback never throws an interception, but I got to tell you, he had a serious mental health crisis in his life, and he was begging for help. And when they let him out early during the 72-hour hold, that was just a recipe for disasters, tragically.
Right. Yeah. I'm not 100% certain on the fact that what they did or didn't do, but there's a limited capacity of mental health providers. Usually people stop taking their medications, decompensate. And what do you do with this? It's an issue that keeps on going on. But you can imagine, Gene, you mentioned it before, there is a victim's family that's associated with this. And after all the homicide cases I've tried as a prosecutor, I can tell you they really don't care much about hearing about mental health issues, addiction issues, that, or the other. Let's listen to one of the victim impact statements in the case.
I'd ask you to turn your head and look at me in the eyes.
Well, sir, we don't want to have any of that. Just go ahead and you need to direct it to me. You're directing it to him through me.
I understand that. This man looked my dad in the eyes before he killed him. And I'm not here to cause a scene other than to speak my heart and my mind and for my father who was murdered by this man. You took something so special from me. You took something so special from this world. You walked into that house not even knowing him, and you took his life when he was trying to save your father and your uncle. You didn't even give him a chance. You have no clue the man that you took. If you would have just sat there and maybe talked to him for 5 minutes, he could have been the man that helped change your life, because that's who my dad was for so many. He was a councilman for so many. He was a heart for so many. People came to him with their problems and he'd help them. He walked people off of bridges who were trying to kill themselves. He was the kind of man that saved people, and you just walked in there and took it like it was nothing. Something so special to my children, my wife, my mother, my sister, my brother. You took it without even thinking about it. Now you sit here with your head down, and you should keep it down for the rest of your life knowing what you did. I hate you, Brandon. I hate everything you did. I hate everything you are. You took something so special from me, and today I'm standing here saying what I feel because I've been waiting 5 years to say these things to this man. What he's done is sick, and the fact that he sits here and acts like he's done nothing because he's got some little mental problems or whatever he tries to say, the root of all that is he was not raised to be a good person. I'm going to stand here today and speak my mind and get what I have out, because you were worth every word that I have to say to you now, but after today, I will think nothing of you. 5 years ago, you stole something so precious, something that can't be replaced. You stole my best friend. You took my dad with your own hands without the thought of the damage you would be causing. You selfishly took the life of a man you didn't even know. And even more sad, a man who was trying to save your own family from you. You killed your own father, so clearly you and I valued our fathers completely different. I adored my dad. I was raised different than you. I was raised to value life and the people who I am blessed to have in it. You were raised being told you were the best. You were spoiled and never taught how to be a person of value. You were taught that people should value you, and sadly, because of your lack of character, values, and the ability to make good choices, you have ruined your life, stolen 3 lives, hurt and affected so many other people's lives with your cowardly, spineless, and heartless choices. You were given nearly $1 million after working towards one goal because you were never taught or given the skills to be a good person. You wasted all your hard work. You destroyed your talents and any chance of having a life. You threw it all away. And the worst part is, you sit here today acting like a spoiled brat who's done nothing wrong and blame your parents and others for your actions. Honestly, I blame your parents as well. I blame them for not being parents, but more like business partners raising a meal ticket.
Those are the powerful words of Jeremy Swanson, who was the son of the ADT man, the alarm company person man, who was killed in this brutal attack and was actually trying to help save the father and the uncle from the brutal onslaught. Tiffany, look, as a prosecutor, I'm looking at a number of factors here. Of course, I'm going to take mental health things into consideration, but we also have to look at the fact that there was a long-standing history with this gentleman that was having problems with his coaches. He was having behavioral issues. There were people that tried to help him. His parents felt forced to put him into that 72 mental health hold. He also was a person who has espoused that he didn't like the fact that he came from an interracial couple. He hated Black people. He was taking skin, products in order to whiten his complexion. So there was a lot that went on here prior to all of this. And listen, mental health services, and I know what we said before, they're not the best in the world, but you can only lead a horse to water. Give them the medication, give them the treatment. And it just seems that this was a long-standing thing. And he made the choice. And as a prosecutor that tried homicide cases, I wouldn't have much sympathy given the brutality and number of people killed in this situation. I agree with what that gentleman said in his victim impact statement. You?
Well, it's totally understandable, the things that were said by the victim impact statement that we just heard. It's understandable to have rage, to have that hate. However, that's not going to bring his dad back. And one thing that I will say, although Brandon Willie Martin did have a history of behavioral problems, we don't see that he had a criminal history up until these recent years where he pulled a knife on his mother, Melody Martin. Now, again, I stand on he should have gotten help way sooner than this 72-hour hold. In addition to that, I see even in some of my own cases in real life, I've had clients who self-medicated instead of getting the proper care they need for mental illnesses. So it's not unlike, it's not out of the ordinary that we see that Mr. Martin didn't take his medication or went off of it and self-medicated with drugs, etc. Again, mental health among people of color is very, very important for us to target and us to look at what we can do differently to help stop some of these situations from escalating to a point of murder, such as we see here.
Yeah, I mean, fair enough point, Gene, that Tiffany is making, but, I'm just going to play devil's advocate with this, if you will, for a moment. Even if we had the level of mental health resources that we would like in the criminal justice system, doesn't necessarily mean that good people aren't going to do bad things. Virtually every homicide case I've ever tried, the defendant had a motivation, was overwhelmed, overcome, in some fashion. And yet we have to lay the law down as a society that says, well, these kind of actions, short of you being declared mentally insane and therefore not responsible for your conduct, have to be aggressively prosecuted. The mother in this case did not want the death penalty. Now, she's obviously suffered a tremendous loss here as well, indicating that she did not want her son to be put to death because it would be a dagger in her heart. So did the punishment meet the crime here, Gene Rossi, or was this, in your mind, better? I know you're against the death penalty. Better tried as a death penalty case, or is life without parole enough?
I think in this case, especially, life without parole is the appropriate. and it gets to what Tiffany said, he should have gotten help well before the tragic day when he took the lives of 3 people. This could have been going on for 2, 3, 4 years, and there could have been red flags that they didn't address. But for this type of crime, I don't see premeditation. I don't see planning. I think this was an incident where he intended the death of Jeremy Swanson's dad, Barry, who was a Vietnam vet. He intended the death of his father and his uncle. No doubt about that. But what drove him to that? It was the mental health condition he had that caused him to be in that situation. It's not like somebody who plans it months and weeks and months in advance. So I would say in this case, life without parole is appropriate. And you're right. I have now come to that. I've crossed that Rubicon. I am against the death penalty.
Right. So Gene Rossi just bringing the heat home in terms of the difference between what a defense could be to a crime as opposed to the mental health issue being a mitigating factor that weighs into what the appropriate sentence would be. Guys, Jeffrey Epstein was killed in or suicide in a jail, whatever, it's subject to dispute. There's even more controversy going on with respect to that jail right now as the warden resigns. We'll talk about that on the other end of the break.
Not only did they take him off suicide watch, but they had put him in another cell with another inmate who was less dangerous, and they took that guy out a day or 2 before he died. The cameras suddenly didn't work that day. The 2 guards I've heard in investigations in prisons that 1 guard can fall asleep, but never 2 guards at the same time. And he was left exposed to 800 prisoners who may not have liked him, and to guards without any security at all.
Of course, that was Dr. Michael Baden, famed forensic pathologist, that was speaking to the Law and Crime Network's Brian Ross. Gene, let's go to this case. I mean, the warden who was replaced to replace the warden that was in charge when Epstein was either killed or suicide, and I know there's a lot of debate about that, has abruptly resigned from the correctional facility. Gene, what's happening?
You know, Dostoevsky said, if you want to judge a society, go to its jails or prisons. All right. And I got to tell you this, I am ashamed, I am embarrassed that the United States Bureau of Prisons has a facility called the Metropolitan Correctional Center. It has 600 inmates. It is a complete, total disaster. It is infested with rodents. It's unsanitary. It's a COVID super spreader. And the guards, it's a comedy of errors in a sad way that has resulted in people dying. And I am embarrassed to read about this. And this is the 4th warden in 18 months. Something is rotten in Denmark.
Yeah, Gene, there were, in addition to the Epstein thing, Tiffany, rather, there were a number of anomalies that were going on in the jail since that point in time, including locking somebody down for 24 hours that had mental health issues and had the emotional maturity of an 8-year-old, and used to, I love this line, used to talk to the mice and the rats. I mean, to Gene's point, this facility is notorious of being a disaster of uncleanliness, unhealthiness, and sexual assaults, weapons being brought into the facility, and death. Tiffany, what do you think about all this?
I think that it is a disaster. And I think that the warden, Lycon Vitali, thought that, hey, this is something that I can't handle. To be in a position only for a year and there was no changes made. In fact, it sounds like it's worse than what it was before she came. It just says a lot. I think that whole facility needs to be revamped with a warden that's committed to change and not one that is just there for a paycheck, clearly.
Yeah, Gene, I mean, my experience in some of the jail investigations that we were involved in, I always wanted to put undercovers in the jail facility to see what information they could get out, but there's such high risk issues with respect to that and officer safety issues. But it's like another world. I always say that when the defendant leaves the courtroom, they go into the ether of the prison system and they have a lot of authoritative control, not a lot of oversight. And with all due respect, the fact is the prisoners' complaints aren't really taken seriously. And as a public at large, we say, oh, those are just prisoners. They're a thrown away group of people. And I felt that way even when I was a prosecutor. I prosecuted for people to serve sentences pursuant to the law, but not to be put into a torture chamber.
Absolutely. And here's a statistic that really shocks me. There are 600 inmates at the MCC, Metropolitan Correctional Center in Manhattan. 600 inmates. They are down 25% of their prison guards. And among the remaining 75%, they have elevated people who have no experience. I guess there was an article that we just read where the person who keeps replaces the soap in the bathroom, they've now promoted that person to a prison guard. I'm sorry. We have to have skilled correctional officers. It can't be like F Troop, that famous, that old TV show where it's just a bunch of goofballs. This is serious business. And I got to tell you this, I don't know if it's the ACLU or one of the organizations that monitor prisons. They should do a beeline to the federal court, get a judge to issue a TRO, and establish a receivership for the MCC yesterday.
Yeah, Gene, we're having a big problem here with the female facility out in New Jersey with more scandalous accusations. And I'll tell you what some corrections officers have told me, many of whom were on the verge of, I would call, a nervous breakdown. The good ones are caught between two very bad places. The prisoners who may want to do them harm and corrections officers who aren't doing the right thing. And if they basically come out, their lives are in serious jeopardy because they're in those facilities without weapons. So we'll see where this goes, but hopefully it will shake the tree. And I hope that anyone can agree that we should make sure that our jails are at least safe. Let's move to topics. The death penalty in Virginia. You may not know this. Gene Rossi, by the way, is a son of Virginia. He is a great advocate into the political structure. I always see his tweets. Well, they're now moving to abolish the death penalty. Do you know, Gene Rossi, that they were the first of the 13 colonies to actually execute somebody? They've had some of the highest rates of execution in the country. I was surprised at that. There was a moratorium that was placed in 2017. In 2020, there was a bill to try to abolish the death penalty. It went nowhere. It was DOA. However, Gene, you're from Virginia. I'm being told there's now bipartisan support of Democrats and Republicans who want to abolish the death penalty, many saying they were invoked to do this because of the rapid executions that occurred during the Trump administration and that frenzied execution style that they went in terms of executing people that many thought didn't get due process. So, Gene, tell me about your intimate knowledge about what's going on there in Virginia, because by all estimations, we know the governor is going to sign the bill. It looks like the Virginia, one of the longest states to ever have the death penalty, is about to abolish it.
Well, before I get to the new Virginia, I am now a proud Virginian from Connecticut. What an irony. But Donald Trump, of all his contributions to the abolition of the death penalty, his desire and Bill Barr's desires to rush and do 10 to 15 executions in the last year and a half, that probably will be the reason for the abolition of the death penalty in Virginia, which outside of Texas used to be one of the most prolific implementers of the death penalty. Let's talk about Virginia. In the last 15 years...
I'm sorry, before we get to Virginia, I just want to know, I do have some breaking news with respect to you and Virginia that no one in the world, I believe, knows. And I hear it is your position that where the phrase Virginia is for lovers, that you want to include Virginia is for polenta lovers. Is that true, Gene?
Is that my phone ringing?
That's our little inside joke about polenta. But anyway, Gene, I just do want to go to Tiffany real quick. Tiffany, the prosecutor in Richmond, Colette Meckelin, Gene may know the name, had a very prophetic quote and is very consistent with myself, who was a death penalty prosecutor at one point in my career. She said, the question is not whether somebody deserves to die because of the depravity of their act, but whether we as a society are so convinced of the infallibility of our decisions that we should sentence an individual to death. That is literally exactly the reason when I saw how those cases were proceeding through the court, how the lawyering was getting done, depending on the judge you had, that I sat there and said, wow, it is so arbitrary. I'm uncomfortable. What do you think?
I agree with that statement. And that statement is actually profound because giving the government power to say whether a person lives or dies, that's something that, again, I think it needs to be abolished. You see in so many cases where people, they're not really guilty, but they're still they still die, based on these rules and these laws that are arbitrary, and they just need to be abolished. It's people that should be here today that have been executed, but for the death penalty.
All right, Gene, I'm going to give you an opportunity to respond. Is it true that your new slogan is Virginia is for polenta lovers? I know you want to let me know if that's accurate. Can a Brajol lover get in there too, or is it just a polenta lover?
Maybe. Let's just stick with polenta. And I'm making bumper stickers, and I'm going to give one to Tiffany. She'll get the first one, and you'll get the second one. And Kathy Rutherford's getting the third. Okay. I got to say this: there are not enough Italians in the Commonwealth of Virginia. That's point number one. But on a serious note, July of 2017, I and another individual wrote an article in the Washington Post Metro section. And what happened was Governor Terry McAuliffe had ordered the execution, and they implemented it. They executed a man. I don't want to mention his name because his family, I want to protect the family and the victims of family. But they executed a man who had incredibly serious mental health issues when he committed the crime, after he committed the crime, and number three, he did not have the best representation. That today breaks my heart. Here's why I mention it. This individual who was executed, one of his victims was a deputy sheriff, a correctional officer or deputy sheriff. His daughter called me and thanked me for writing the article because she opposed the death penalty. That changed my mind dramatically. The daughter of her father was killed, and she was opposed to the death penalty. That changed my life dramatically.
Yes, we used to have victims that did not want to go forward with the death penalty on many reasons. It's hard to explain to an audience on just a slight case like this, a small case like this, but even the executions that occurred at the end of the Trump administration, a matter of days made the difference as to whether you died or whether you lived. And that just, again, is too arbitrary for me. Great commentary, guys. Listen, a 16-year-old is slammed to the ground by a police officer and in Florida, and the video of it has gone viral. We're going to talk about that on the other end of the break. Stay with us. Welcome back to Law&Crime Report. I'm Bob Bianchi. And listen, we're talking about a lot of interesting topics today about death penalty, and we got a lot more coming on here. Always feel free to go on the Law&Crime platforms like Facebook Live, which is probably around 3 o'clock today. I'd love to know what your commentary is about it because these are complex and difficult subjects. I think from mental health to law and crime. Anyway, a 16-year-old Taylor Bracely out of Florida was a teenager, was engaged in a fight, and a school resource officer who was a police officer with a department. In that state, you have to have a resource officer, at least one in every school. Tried to break that fight up, and there was some dramatic video that went viral, at least part of a video that we see with him taking down the officer, taking down the 16-year-old girl. Let's take a look. Okay, and again, this girl was involved in an altercation. We only seen a snippet of a video. As you guys, if you watch me, know, I kind of get nervous when I see these things because they tend to form in the court of public opinion, and we don't necessarily have all of the video that a lot of times kind of alters the scenario. But we have Ben Crump is again involved in a civil rights case and gave a statement saying essentially that this officer, she was slammed down, she was unconscious, she suffered a concussion, that it was completely foreseeable, and you're not supposed to knock them unconscious. You're supposed to be the person who knows how to de-escalate a situation And it's just, to use his words, mind-boggling. And he called it the adultification of Black children, that children are seen as adults. No, this was a child. So let me go to you guys real quick. Tiffany, what are your thoughts in terms of at least my feeling that let's get all the facts? I hate when these selected videos come out in piecemeal, number one. And number two, there's a fight going on. I'm just going to throw the question out there because I know how cops and law enforcement think. I was one for a long period of time. They're going to say that, you know what? If we interceded, then we're in trouble if we have to take somebody down if they're not obeying lawful commands. Now, we don't know if there were lawful commands or not. We just don't know enough about it at this point in time. But secondarily, if we don't do something and they get injured or somebody else gets injured, we're told, why didn't we intercede and use force? It sometimes can be complex. And I know the video looks terrible, but sometimes these cops are put in situations where they have to make moment by moment decisions, again, without having all the evidence. What do you think?
Well, with what I saw and what I've heard about it, Bob, I believe he was out of line. He used excessive force in trying to de-escalate a fight amongst children. Taylor Bracy, she is a 16-year-old kid, not an adult that he had to apply this much force to. When you have someone who hit their head on concrete and then ultimately they're knocked unconscious, you went over and beyond your job as a school resource officer. He was not acting in his capacity as a police officer. You're a school resource officer, so you should have some sort of discernment when you're working with children. Now, although we didn't see a full video, even still, this incident is traumatizing even for me to watch because she could have died. You never know what type of, things may come later with her getting hit and knocked unconscious by this school resource officer that was supposed to be de-escalating a fight. Now, what I did see, because I actually did a little research on this, what I did hear was that the fight had stopped and she had stopped fighting. So it was no need for him to slam her body to the ground like that. Not a child. This is a child. And I do agree with Attorney Crump in stating that oftentimes young Black children are made to be adults when they're just kids. And she was a kid and she didn't deserve to be slammed to the ground like that.
Yeah, but Tiffany, can you at least in a situation when an altercation is occurring, we need more facts, that's for sure. And an officer is taking somebody down to the ground. It is unfortunate she hit her head, and if in fact she had a concussion and those things, I have no reason to dispute that one way or the other. Bodies don't necessarily fall down to a prescribed plan. Sometimes injury occurs. Sometimes it doesn't. So, I mean, this guy was also a flag football coach. He was a very well-respected guy. He doesn't have any disciplinary record of any kind of significance or violence or activity. I mean, if you were defending him, would you be bringing those facts out to say he was employing force and unfortunately there was an injury, but he did not intend that injury to occur? Is that a defense?
Yes, I would definitely say that he was acting in the scope of his employment by apprehending her during this fight, if I was his defense attorney. However, I would also look at the fact that, again, this is a kid, and I feel as though that there were other ways that he could have de-escalated a possible fight. But like you said, we're only seeing a snippet of a video, and oftentimes things are decided in the court of public opinion before all the facts are let out.
Amen. I can't agree with that anymore, Tiffany. Gene, I want to go to another point here. There's a reaction in the community, and we were very community involved, but the community leaders are calling for a repeal of the Florida law that requires at least one school resource officer being a police officer be in each school. They want the police officer fired. They never want him to work as a resource officer again. And they want an investigation led not by the task that normally reviews these, but by a community task force. I see problems with many of that. I just want to shout out there for the school resource officers that worked in our community who did an amazing job. They didn't slam anybody down. They were vital for gaining intelligence. They were vital for stopping things before they happen. They were vital in stopping violent situations before they occurred. So I just don't want to see the baby thrown out with the bathwater here.
I agree. And I have 3 kids, a daughter, 30, a son, 28, and Jack Rossi, he's now 20 today, February 1st. All 3 of my kids went to T.C. Williams High School in Alexandria, Virginia. Remember the Titans. That school is 4,500 kids. It is the most diverse school in America. It's got 25% white, 33% African American, and the other portion is Hispanic, Asian, and other minorities. 50 countries are represented in that school. If we didn't have resource officers, I call them security officers, resource officers, and we have the best at that school. If we didn't have several of those, it would be a different story. But I want to address something that's global here. The adultification
Make it quick, Gene.
of young, yeah. The statistics show that kids of minority color or minorities are referred to the police more than white kids in high schools and junior high. There's something wrong with that data.
Well, I'm going to tell you a true story. I had the African-American community come to me as prosecutors upset that we didn't have school resource officers in the schools, and they thought that was creating a violent environment. So there's 2 sides of that coin that sometimes don't always match. We got to switch gears real quick, guys, to Rod Stewart. He has reached a plea deal for a 2019 on New Year's Eve event where he and his quote-unquote entourage, I don't know how many of us have an entourage, but whatever, we're at the Breakers Resort in Palm Beach, very swanky place. They wanted to get into a private party. They weren't able to get in. And during some part of an altercation, Rod Stewart, the famed singer, punches one of the security guards in the ribs. He was a 34-year-old man. And from what you understand, Rod Stewart immediately apologized to the man. And his son, Rod Stewart's son, Sean, 40 years of age, was also charged with simple battery. Gene, I know that you're a rock and roll fan and you have all of Rod Stewart's records and albums. I know off camera you talked about your feelings about this case. Bring it home.
If Rod Stewart told me the world was flat, I would believe him. Okay? Maggie May, his disco songs. I listened to them probably 10,000 times. This is very disappointing for me, but here's what happened. You got a guy, Rod Stewart, he's got a little elevated ego, he's got his entourage. Somebody said something to him, he lost his temper, his son lost his temper. It's a little fisticuffs. Let's resolve this and move on. It's not the crime of the century.
All right, excellent. Tiffany, I'm going to have to leave you off on that one, but I will get to you first. As we come back on the other break, we're talking about Derek Chauvin back in the news with regard to safety during the trial of what's going to happen again, Chauvin having been charged with the killing of George Floyd. We'll be right back.
Today's hearing marked another step in what will be a long process toward justice. I think the Floyd family, the community, and the people of the state of Minnesota for their understanding and patience as we make our case and continue to move forward to a trial. At this time, I'm not in a position to answer any questions. Those of you who know me know that I do answer questions. However, today's court proceeding is a motion to consider motions that have been heard by the court, and therefore I will not comment on them. So that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Yikes, Tiffany. I've handled a lot of press conferences as the prosecutor that were rough with reporters asking questions, but I cannot imagine having a crowd of people. It seemed like at least hundreds, if not more, screaming and yelling. Can you give us some insights as to what is the sentiment out there? The Attorney General is moving forward with these cases. Why is there such controversy? Was this a pro Chauvin group or an anti-Chauvin group? What are you making of this?
Well, I'm not sure what to make of it. It may be people that are against Derek Chauvin, and it may be people that are there in support of George Floyd. I am watching it just as you watch it unfold. One thing I will say, being prepared for this trial is going to be paramount to this city and for the prosecution side. So I agree that they do need to add more state personnel. However, as far as the budget breakdown only covering Derek Chauvin's trial, I don't agree with that.
Well, Gene, I have a problem with, I want jurors to be pristine and the court proceedings to be pristine. We don't know what's going to happen during the trial, but I mean, if this is any indication, this is problematic in terms of a judge trying to have a fair trial. And as a prosecutor, I want to make sure nobody's coming back at the end of my conviction saying that it was tainted in some way. So the Minnesota governor is actually asking for at least 600 state personnel, an untold, quote unquote, amount of law enforcement officers from local departments, and wants to establish a $35 million fund, not to mention another law enforcement agency seeking $4 additional million in order just to protect and to have that presence there for this trial. And boy, I mean, I understand why they want to do it, but this could be a bad situation because it could be rioting going on or confrontation, if you will, amongst law enforcement and protesters outside of that courthouse. And ultimately, the judge is responsible for the orders in the case. Gene, what do you think about all this extraordinary amount of money?
Well, I always think, as a criminal defense attorney, I always think of the due process rights of the defendant. I always do. And as a prosecutor, you think about that. I am reminded of the famous case of Dr. Shepard versus Ohio. It was a murder case in the 1960s. The Supreme Court of the United States reversed because of the drama and all the media attention during the trial. And I see red flags and loud gongs regarding this Chauvin trial that could go to the Supreme Court and lead to a reversal. I think this case should be moved to another county. You could maybe transport the jury to this far off county where you would have less protests, but I don't think it should be held in the Minneapolis area because it's just it's too high toxic. That's too high profile.
Yeah, Tiffany, I'm curious about what you think about what Gene's saying, moving it off-site to another location, and if that helps secure the due process rights of both sides. But also, I'm interested in your feeling about, wow, wouldn't it have been good to have $35 million in funds available, 600 state officers, and an untold amount of local police officers at the Capitol on January 6th?
Exactly. We definitely could have used that 35 million, for other things, especially at the Capitol. I think that moving this trial to another place, unfortunately, I don't know if it will make a difference. The death of George Floyd, that rocked the world, for lack of a better word. So I don't know if the publicity will be any different if the case was tried outside of that area or not. I do believe that the case definitely needs to be tried. Derek Chauvin, he needs to address and face trial for what he did. But I don't think moving the trial would make a difference because this is a case that everyone knows about. The world is watching. So regardless of where the case is, it's going to be high profile and it's going to bring a lot of people out, whether people that are pro Chauvin or people that are there in support of George Floyd.
Yeah, Gene, I agree completely with Tiffany, but let me ask you, prosecutors are also back in the appellate.
And I respectfully disagree. Go ahead.
Okay, why do you disagree?
Because you'd be surprised. Minnesota's a large state, and you'd be surprised. There are individuals who don't watch Fox News, MSNBC, CNN. They're not listening to the news, and they've heard about the George Floyd case, but they may not have that level of passion for or against Mr. Chauvin or the police, for or against the police. You would be surprised moving it way outside. And I'll give you a good example. Oklahoma City bombing in 1995, of course, April of 95 was the incident. When they had that trial, it was moved to Colorado. And everybody heard about the Oklahoma City bombing, but in a relative sense. They got a jury that was relatively unbiased and lacked unprejudiced. There's no perfect selection process, but I disagree respectfully to these brilliant colleagues on this show today. I think it would mitigate. Not eliminate the high octane atmosphere that you'd have in Minneapolis.
Yeah, it could also lead to cherry picking. I got 15 seconds, Tiffany, with regard to jurors who aren't from the community, and they're supposed to be jurors from that community. You got 5 seconds. Do you agree with that?
I do not agree with that. It needs to have jurors
Okay.
that are from the actual community.
Okay. That's exactly what I was saying. Okay, guys, thanks so much for the great commentary. Have a great week. Regularly scheduled program next.